Sirens burst into excitement down the packed streets of Chicago multiple times a day. Onlookers look over to see what all of the commotion's about, but rarely get the full story. This is everyday Chicago life, but is there more to it than those sirens proclaim? Frank Main, a crime reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, understands all too well.
It is like your hair is always on fire in Chicago. It is, especially in the last year and a half. Crime, murder and shootings have doubled, and so it's impossible to concentrate on every single one of those crimes.
Main has been covering crime for almost 20 years in Chicago. He says there's a certain level of violence that can't surely be stopped. Guns make it into the city in numerous amounts of ways.
There have been guns for decades in Chicago, and so there are old junky guns that some of these kids have. A lot of them misfire because they're not good. They'll steal guns from grandma and grandpa who have guns to protect themselves in these high crime neighborhoods. And then a lot of the guns come from suburban gun stores outside of Chicago.
Just last year, 4,300 people were shot in Chicago. Main recently did a series of stories over a 4-month span where he went on ride-alongs with Chicago homicide detectives to try to solve a murder case of a teenager.
What struck me about that story is that the homicide detectives were certain that his friends knew who did it, and his enemies certainly knew who did it. And as I sat there and watched these detectives talk to these people and tell them, we're not going to tell you anything, it became really clear to me why there's such a problem in Chicago.
It seems that more and more people are starting to not trust the police. Many, it turns out, have specific reasons.
You might have a migrant worker from California who's in Chicago and doesn't want to talk to the police because he's worried of getting deported, and he's worried that this guy who shot him is going to come back and do his family. You have people who got shot, but they were criminals themselves, and the judges didn't trust them, and they didn't feel like anybody in the system would really take their word seriously.
This melting pot of a city has a society that is too familiar with the uninvited guest, the gun. And when high schoolers were questioned about them, the results were shocking.
He was like, does anybody know somebody who's been shot? Raise your hand. Everybody raised their hand. He says, does anybody know 5 people who've been shot? Half the room. Does anybody know 10? Quarter of the room. Does anybody know 20? Hands still went up.
Yet, the remaining question still stands. How will this be solved? Main believes that it's going to take much more than just arresting people.
It is a super complicated economic problem that needs to be addressed with, unfortunately, with money and education and parenting.
Maddie Jacobson, DTV News.